Hi, friends. Welcome to Bar of the Conference. I'm your host, Derek Scott III. In today's interview, I get to speak with Laura Witkowski. Laura is a Michigan native and was raised in a United Methodist congregation that valued the questions we often ask on the faith journey. She is a layperson, a General Conference delegate, and has served in multiple areas in the Michigan Annual Conference, including on conference staff for the last 11 years. Laura understands the important role of the laity in the life of the church, and she also sees the gap that is often experienced between the local church and the conference. In this heartfelt episode, she speaks of the courage it takes to do the work to be the church that embraces all people. As she shares her journey, I think it will resonate with all of us, but especially the lay folks in the audience. Ultimately, she provides some insights into what I believe is the future of the UMC. So grab that notebook, get that choice beverage, and let's settle in for this episode with Laura Witkowski. Laura Witkowski, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Derek. How are you?
I'm so good, and partly good because I get to be with you in this space. Really grateful that you joined me on this podcast. We met, actually, I think you emailed me because you invited me to come up to the Michigan Annual Conference to be a part. Well, I guess that the first one I did was a virtual annual conference, but I still got to hang out with y'all in person because of some glitches in the technology. So I did get to come up and hang out. And then you invited me back again the following year to be with y'all in person. Y'all are some of the best United, as far as I'm concerned. I know I'm going to upset somebody. It's like, I thought you said we were the best. Like, yeah, I probably did, but I really meant Michigan. Like, Michigan United Methodist, y'all are hospitable.
Michigan's pretty cool. Yeah.
You put the H. You put the H in it.
That's right.
Laura, I'm just really grateful for you, for your ministry as a fellow lay leader in the United Methodist Church, and someone who I just see you as a person who really is helping not just define the role of laity, but really carve out and protect the space so that laity continue to speak into the life of our church all the way through our system. And I'm really grateful to you for that. And we'll get into some of that. So for those who need to know, this is an episode about laity. Like this is straight up an episode, but we'll see. Yay! We'll see, because you can take me on all kinds of roads. We're going there. True. But my intention is to really talk a lot about the role of laity in the church. But I'd love to know how you became a Christian and a United Methodist Christian at that. God's prevenient grace in your life that brought you into the faith.
Yeah. So I recently came to the realization that I think I'm a fourth generation Methodist. Which is just wild for me to think about, because that also means that my son is a fifth generation Methodist, which feels even crazier to me.
Come on.
Yeah, I know. It's wild.
In the family. That's awesome.
That's right. And honestly, it explains so much about me. Like, that's really all you need to know, to be perfectly honest. So I essentially, was basically born into church. Like, I didn't know anything different. My parents, when I was born, were attending a relatively small church in the Grand Rapids area. We all still go to that church today. When I left the area for a while, and then my husband and I moved back to the area, I was like, I have to go back to this church. Like I can't, it just keeps calling me back there. Right. But I was baptized there, confirmed there. I was in the kids choir. I was in the bell choir. I was the president of our youth group, right? Like I did all those things as a youth in my church that you could possibly do. It was never a question of like, if we're going to church. It was just like, okay, it's Sunday. We're going to church. It's Christmas Eve. We're going, like, it didn't matter. And I don't remember. So I have two older brothers who are significantly older than I am. And I don't remember any of us like really complaining about it. It was just part of who we were and what we did. Memorized all those Bible verses that, you're supposed to memorize as a kid, all those things. And I think the best part about my experience growing up in that particular church, it's a real question asking church. Like, if you don't understand something, or if you're really like, is that really true? Right? Like you can ask all those questions. I don't know another way to like be a part of a church other than be able to ask those questions. Right.
Right.
And as I got older, I realized that was very unusual because I just kind of took it for granted when I was like in high school. I just took it for granted. I thought that's what people did in church. I thought they asked those questions about those wild scriptures, right? That you're just like, I don't even understand how this could be a thing. But it was really like cultivated in us. It was just allowed no matter what new pastor came to our church, the appointment system, it was the same, which was really great. So I just didn't know anything different. That's just the way it was.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'd love to know, well, before I go there, I really appreciate that that's your perspective of how church was, and maybe so both say should be, because I think it definitely shapes how then you as an individual, but also as a layperson, then engage this understanding, this expectation that questions are a part of the journey and not a sign that something's wrong with the journey.
Right.
And it's amazing how when that is a part of your faith development, that we welcome those questions because that means something's happening.
Right.
It means that there's engagement. I'm actually reading the text.
That's right.
Not just letting go in one ear and out the other, or just memorizing it by rote, but I'm really taking it seriously. And again, there's a way to have that conversation with clergy, but I think there's a unique way that conversation arrives when it comes to laity. So I'm curious, and I'll ask the question in this way. I'd love to hear about your call to ministry, which is usually, again, a question that gets asked of our clergy multiple times as they're going through, the process of candidacy within our denomination. It's not a question that often gets asked of the laity. So I'd love to hear a little bit of your story around your call to ministry.
Yeah. It's so interesting when I understand that question now, but as I was going through that as like high schooler, college age, young adult, I would have been like, what call? Like, I don't know what you mean. Right. Cause like, it just feels different. And now I get it. So it's helpful for me to look back and kind of see all of the things that led me there. And I always feel like I find myself in places that I'm asked to do things where I'm like, I really, like, you want me to do that? I don't understand why you're asking me to do that. And that's just been like over my whole life. That's always happened to me. Right. I had incredible youth group leaders and my pastor at the time, middle school through high school. And they really kind of poured into me in a way that I hadn't experienced before, where I felt like what I said mattered, what I thought mattered, the questions I was asking mattered, right? Where like in some other instances, people would just kind of get annoyed, right? They'd just be like, oh my gosh, it's just the way it is, okay? Like, it's just the way it is. And I had those three particular people who never made me feel that way. And so that was kind of the beginning of that journey. Then from 7th grade until I graduated high school, I was a part of a United Methodist camp called Christian Athletic Camp. And it was a different kind of church summer camp than what you kind of think about when you think about summer camp. We did it in like a joint effort with the Indiana Conference, which as I look back at that, I think is just kind of funny to me. But it worked. And it was held in a high school instead of like in a traditional camp setting. And, we were all split up by grade and by gender, and we all slept in classrooms, like on cots. Like, it was just wild. Like it was fascinating. And so all day we would have like 3 sports activities that we would do all day. We'd have a meal, we would sing after lunch like you typically do at a church camp. And then in the evenings, we would have a different kind of worship experience each night. And then we would have small group time at the end of the day. And that small group time meant more to me than I ever knew it could. The conversations we had during those just really impacted me in that young age. And like, now that I think about it, there were people a part of this that were like all over the theological spectrum, right? We all did not all think the same. Like, I heard all kinds of stuff that I would never have heard at my own local church. Yeah. And they were from kids that were my age, right? It was just it was just really profound. I owe a lot to my faith journey to Christian Athletic Camp, because it was just a really, really great experience. And so that kind of like made me think like, oh, maybe I could do something at some point in the church. Like, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know, like, I knew at that point I wasn't called into ordination. I still am very clear I don't have that calling. People ask me that all the time. I think people have finally stopped asking me that because they've known me long enough that
they're probably going to keep asking, Laura. They're going to keep asking.
I know. Yeah. And so at the time, like, I didn't know what that meant. I was like, I know I want to do something, but I have no idea what that means or what it's going to be. I just know that I know it'll stay with me, and I just need to kind of work through it. So then, I go to college. I went to Albion College my freshman year, which is a United Methodist college in Michigan. Did not have a great experience, which I feel sort of bad about saying because it's a United Methodist college, but I didn't. I had a series of things happen that I just couldn't stay there. So I transferred out of Albion. Ended up at the University of Memphis, which was really a great experience for me as a young white woman from West Michigan, like a pretty, like, not very diverse community, kind of a conservative community, right? Like very different. So then I end up in Memphis, which is just the exact opposite of the world I came from. And it was great. It was great. Like, I had a great experience there. I stayed there a couple years after I graduated. At that point was the moment where I didn't, it's not that I totally like left the church. It just wasn't a priority for me at that time in my life. And I was one that, like, I would go to church on Easter. I would go to church on Christmas, right? Like, I was a college student. So I knew that was important. Because that's how I was brought up. So I knew I had to keep doing that. But I didn't do anything else outside of that. So then, like, this kind of gets into like my whole experience as a layperson after college.
Mm-hmm.
So I moved back from Memphis under really sort of heartbreaking circumstances. Didn't have a job when I moved back, didn't have a place to live when I moved back, moved in with my parents, all the things. Like, it was kind of a mess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I had my pastor from when I grew up who was the conference secretary. So after I graduated high school, every summer when I would come home for the summer, he would hire me to assist him in conference secretary work.
Oh, cool.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
So I helped put together the journal. Like, I would go to annual conference and just kind of be behind the scenes, right? Like, doing all this background stuff. It was great. It was a great summer job. I loved it. It was very different from like what all my friends were doing. It was really hard to explain to them what I was doing for my summer job. So after I moved back, I kind of reconnected with that, not full time, but more than just the summer. And so that kept me as like an active layperson in a very unusual kind of way, because it was at like a conference level.
Yeah.
So that was pretty wild. That was really wild. So then I'm like 26 or 27-ish, somewhere around that age. And our conference secretary, who was not the one I was working with, there was one in between us. Her term was up. She was, moving on. And they asked me to be conference secretary.
Laura, I didn't know you were conference secretary.
Right? I was like 26 or 27 years old.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure I was like the youngest conference secretary. I don't know about ever, but at least in Michigan. It was wild.
Well, so wild. I want to just slide back just a little bit, because I think there's, I'll speak for me. One of the things that I have loved about being involved at the annual conference level of our church is this sense that the evangelistic work is taking place at the local church. The discipleship work is taking place at the local church. But there, for some of us, is this fascination and I'll even say calling towards how we put all the pieces together, how we nurture the connection that is unique to our denomination. And it does feel like some really cool stuff happens at the conference level. Yeah. And so to be a layperson that, and I remember this, to be a layperson seeing those pieces was just like, Jesus, if you need one more person, I'll put my hand up. And so I wonder the ways that you were just assisting that pastor who was conference secretary that brought you on every summer. I mean, I imagine there are probably some parts that's like, okay, I got to do this because this is like what's been asked of me, and I'm going to do it because it was asked of me. But I imagine there were other parts. It's like, I'm pinching myself because I get to see this. I get to be in the room where these things happen. Am I right? Like,
yeah. And really, I think it was more that than, okay, I have to do this because it's I think the whole experience was like, this is great. This is great. Like, I love all this. Like, I learned weird things about the discipline that I don't think I ever would have really picked up on had I not had that experience. Like, I just started gaining all of this real deep structural United Methodist knowledge that as I went along, I was like, what am I going to do with this information? as I keep, and then I became conference secretary, and I was like, oh, this is what I'm going to do with this information. Right. So like, here I am, 26, 27 during annual conference, like at the front table, sitting next to the bishop and the clergy assistant to the bishop. I have no idea how I got there. I have no idea like why I'm there. It was one of those things where I was like, are you sure? Like, are you sure? Like, you want me to do this? Like, okay, I guess I'll try. Like, let's see what happens.
Now, Had you re-engaged in a local church at this point, or were you still sort of estranged?
Yeah. So because I had moved back to Michigan at that point, I had started going back to my local church that I grew up in, that I'm still in today. Yeah. Yep. I'd been back there, very active, doing all the things. Yeah,
Awesome.
nothing had changed.
Which can definitely feel that way when
Yeah.
you go away for a few years and come
Yeah.
back like still the same church.
Yeah. 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 Well, and it's so funny, even today at that church, there are several groups of people that still see me as like that 10-year-old and still talk to me as that 10-year-old, and still they try real hard to understand I'm like a full grown adult with a child, but I know what's behind their comments. Yeah.
I can
hard.
relate. I can
It's hard.
relate. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what was that like, being conference secretary, and how did that take you further into your ministry?
Yeah. I actually enjoyed it. It was challenging for me because I much prefer to be behind the scenes. Like I really much prefer to be in that place.
Same.
So it really challenged me because I couldn't do that. Like I really was in the front. But I found it to be really rewarding, and attending the meetings I had to attend was all a really great experience. I met a lot of people that I'm not sure I would have met otherwise. Made a lot of really great connections, and that's really what really started getting me connected to the actual people in the conference, right? Like meeting all the pastors and clergy and meeting all the lay people. Because before I was so much behind the scenes, the only people I really interacted with were, the folks that needed something from the conference secretary. But once I was in that position, my world was opened of like, oh, this is what it means to be connectional. This is what this looks like, right? This is what this looks like with all these people in this room together, having these conversations, worshiping together. At that time, it wasn't, the tension we experience today at annual conference. There were moments, about some things, there always are, but for the most part, it just, like, I fell in love with annual conference. I was like, this is great. Like, I want to do this for a long time.
Wow.
Yeah.
And actually, I'd love to know, so sitting in the seat as conference secretary, sitting next to the bishop, the assistant to the bishop. And I know our conference secretary is clergy here in Florida. What did you learn, or what did you experience as a layperson in that space?
That's a good question. I learned that you don't have to be clergy to do a lot of things in the church, right? There's space for all of us.
Say that again. Say it again. Yes.
You don't have to be clergy to do things in the church. There's space for all of us. But I also learned, I think at that point, that's when I really understood the dynamic and the partnership that can happen between clergy and lay. Because if you don't have a layperson there, you're never going to see that partnership. Like, you're never going to watch it happen. You're never going to experience it happening. But once it happens, you can't go back. Right? Like, that's how it felt for me. I was like, okay, I understand now how to have my voice be heard as a layperson, how to contribute because that's what I was there to do. Like I wasn't that the conference secretary is not meant to be silent, right? Like that's what I was there to do. And so I think I learned a lot about that particular piece in that time. And like it also any intimidation factor I had of district superintendents or bishops or, conference staff, even like, there's always this level of intimidation. I think all that went away for me. I just didn't have it anymore because at such a young age, I was there for that. So that really helped me too, moving down the road of my lay ministry, I think.
Yeah. So take us on that journey now from conference secretary to conference staff, lay leader development.
Yeah. So at the time I was conference secretary, the last couple years of it, I had a secular job. I didn't work in the church. I worked for a medical management billing company, like whatever. It paid the bills.
Important. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So, but then I think it was my last year of being conference secretary, a position opened up at a local church, Trinity United Methodist Church in Grand Rapids, for their administrative assistant. Their long-term administrative assistant was retiring. I knew the pastors. There was co-pastors at the time. I knew them from my conference secretary work, right? Like that was a connection I made. So I applied for it and got that job. So I, worked for a local church, which I loved. That was a great job for me. I was good at it. I'm very, very organized person. I, can really simplify things for folks to where they all this craziness of the church. I'm one that can really help folks through that, to help them understand it. I found that the majority of that work was people just showing up in the office and just needing to talk to somebody when the pastor wasn't there. And so I was like, okay, what do you want to talk about? Right? Like that was a really fun job. I really, really enjoyed working in the local church. By then, my term of conference secretary was up. So I worked at Trinity for, I think, 4 or 5 years. Ended up moving to Traverse City. So I left my job at Trinity without having a job to go to. Towards the end of my job there, I got a little bored, right? I was doing the same things every day. I'm doing the bulletins every week. I'm answering the same questions. Like I was really good at it, but it had lost a little bit of that fulfillment for me because it just was like the same thing every day.
Not all of us are here for the same thing every day.
Exactly. And I was grateful for my time there, but I was ready to move on. And my husband had gotten a job in Traverse City. He was trying to get out of retail for a long time. So when he took the opportunity to get out of that, we moved to Traverse City. So then I, while we were in Traverse City, had a baby. So most of my maternity leave was unemployment. Like I wasn't employed at all. Eventually, again, got a job in the secular world just to keep me on a health insurance, pay the bills, all those things. It was at that time that was General Conference 2012. So I had never really watched any of those general conferences before. I don't even think they live streamed them, right? Because we didn't have that capability way back when. So I remember being at, again, the job I was at was pretty easy. I would usually finish my work and not have anything else to do, but I was still getting paid. They just didn't have enough for me, was all. So I was trying to remember if I actually brought in my own computer or if I even used a company computer. I don't even know. But I remember watching General Conference 2012, during the day, during the work day. And my husband thought I was crazy. He was like, what? Why are he's like, I don't even understand. Why are you watching this? So at that moment I was like, I think I might be a church nerd. Like this is diving a little bit deeper into just annual conference stuff. And I was just fascinated by it. So then while we were in Traverse City, the position of the administrative assistant to the DCM, the Director of Connectional Ministries, opened up. That person was moving on to a different job. I knew if I could get a job in the conference office, that would lead me to like the places I wanted to go. Mm-hmm. I knew that was how I needed to get there. And I must say, I'm a really great administrative assistant. So I knew I could do the job.
Yeah.
That wasn't a problem for me. And at the same time, this is so fascinating. At the same time, the DCM had called me and asked me if I wanted to be on the Conference Leadership Council, which I think at the time we called it the Conference Leadership Team. I don't know. And I really wanted to do that. Like I was like, yeah, that'd be great. And I was like, but I'm going to apply for this job. Like, I feel like there's a little bit of a conflict of interest, right? So I don't, and he's like, yeah, you're right. If you're on the CLT, like you can't be the administrative assistant for the DCM. So, and honestly, I was torn. I was like, I don't know what to do. Do I apply for this job that I really want? I also really want to like take this role on the conference leadership team. Like I didn't know what to do. So finally I was like, you know what? This is really great. I need to do this. I really want to do this. Applied for the job. Had like, honestly, the longest interview I've ever had with like 10 people around the table. I walked in and I knew all of them. I knew every single person around the table. And I was like, why are you all here? Like, this is crazy.
Okay, I'm not going to lie. It sounds like you are a candidate for ministry coming before the district committee or board of ordained ministry. So there is someone out there, some clergy person listening right now, like, oh, I'm so glad it wasn't just us.
Oh, that's so true. I never thought about that. You're so right. You're so right. Yeah. So I ended up getting that job. So I worked in the Connectional Ministries office in the West Michigan Conference before we created our new conference. Loved that job. I did something different every day. My day never looked the same. Really enjoyed it. Enjoyed the people I was working with. Because of the knowledge I brought from being assistant conference secretary, administrative assistant of a local church, right? Like I just have all of this United Methodist baggage that just goes with me like everywhere I go. Yeah. I found that to be really helpful working for the DCM. Like there were things I just understood, that I'm not sure everyone in that position would have been able to do that.
Yeah.
So then we start going through the process of becoming, creating a new conference and becoming the Michigan Conference. And so that was a very complicated process. Some things we did really well, some things we did not so well. We ended up having a really large staff, which is the people who are on staff right now. And one of the things that they decided to create was this lay leadership development position. So I had many conversations with many people of like, here's what I think it should look like. Here's what I've learned. Here's what I think would be helpful after, all of my experience in the local church. And then they created several other like new positions that we had never had before. We all went through that interview process. I got hired for that in 2018. I think it was 2018. And so that's kind of that progression of how I got to this position today.
Yeah. Laura, I'm curious. Sometimes, not always, there is this distance between what's happening on the ground in a local church and what's happening in the office at the conference level. But a nuance of that distance is the role of the local church administrator, who's getting all these calls, who's hearing what the pastor is saying and what the local church folks are hearing, that distance. And then and so my question is, what was it like to be that person that lived there? And now you go work in the conference. And I'm curious if there was, I don't know, similarities, if there were, dissonance, if there was, oh my gosh, I know how this is going to play out on the ground, and y'all, we need to pump the brakes. Like, what was that like?
Yeah. Two things come to mind. It gave me a greater understanding of what is dealt with at the conference level and why it doesn't always translate to the local church level. I was like, oh, that's why, because they're dealing with this over here, which they have to deal with. Therefore, they can't necessarily think about some of these other things, right? And at the same time, the other thing that's really interesting about going from a local church level to a conference level, the people I interact with became different. So, at a local church level, you're dealing with the whole congregation, whether they are in a leadership position, whether they're coming for worship, whether they're in a small group, right? Like I'm talking to all those people. When you move to a conference level, you're really only interacting with the pastor of the church and like the folks in key lay leader positions. We really lose at the conference level the people in the pew. Because it's, and I understand why. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just what it is.
The reality. Yeah.
It's just the reality. And that's what I really struggled with the most in my current job. Of like, I'm there for those local church lay leaders because they're the ones that need the most support so that they can support their congregation, right? But I also really miss just the people in the pew.
Yeah.
Because those are the folks that I would, talk to the most when I was in the local church that I just don't get that connection with. So like anytime I'm invited to do a workshop in a local church, I love it because that's when it's more than whatever the particular lay leader person is, whether it's a SPRC chair or church council chair or lay leader or whatever. That's when it's those folks and it's the people in the pew, which is like really what I love.
So let me transition. And I'd just love to hear, like, what is the role of laity in our denomination from your perspective?
Well, the laity are the church.
Yes.
I say that everywhere I go.
Yep.
My least favorite thing to hear is that, oh, I'm just a layperson. No, you are a layperson. Like there's no just there. You are a layperson. And like I said before, there are so many things that laity can do in the church that we don't need the pastor to do. Right? There are things that we need the pastor to do. We need that theological education. We need all of those things. I am not saying that there's not a place for pastors, because there most definitely is.
Absolutely.
But there's this whole bunch of other stuff that the pastor doesn't have to do those things. Like, and some churches just rely too heavily on that. They just kind of push everything off to the pastor, which really breaks my heart. Because it overworks the pastor, and then the laity don't have They don't have the investment in their church. They're not having those conversations that they should be having in their church. Like all of those things. I think that it's also important for Laity to understand that it's not just the pastor's job to make disciples and to talk about the love of Jesus Christ. It's all of our jobs.
Yeah.
Like, no matter how uncomfortable it could be in like a conversation outside of church, there's ways to have that. Like, and it doesn't have to be the very first time you meet somebody, right? Like, my husband and I, so he also works for a United Methodist church. He's a community ministries director. So he's like a community person, always out in the community, always talking to people, right? Like that's, like, he just loves that. And we have met many people over the years who we built a relationship with, we become friends with. We trickle in some of our church stories, right? Of like, oh, this, we're doing this really cool thing at our church, and, it might be something you might be interested in. And then as we get to know those people a little bit more, they start to see what we're like and how we're talking about our church and how, like, we say the word Jesus, right? Like, even just saying the word Jesus.
It's a beautiful name. It is a beautiful name. Yes.
Yeah. And like, those people are like, oh, hey, we're thinking about coming to your church. What time is it at? Oh, it's at 9:30. Here, like, blah, blah, all the things. And then they come and it's great. And I think that there are some instances where we just expect our pastor to do all of that kind of work. And that, like, I'm not sure when our faith and love of Jesus became so personal. I don't know when that happened, but at some point along the way, it just became one of those things where it was like, well, that's too personal. I don't want to talk about, my relationship with Jesus, and I don't know. I don't know when that happened. I think we're starting to get out of it.
Yeah.
At least in my experience and like my people around me, I think we're starting to like understand that it's not a personal thing. Like, it's for everybody, right? Like, I don't know.
Wow. Let's take a quick break, Laura.
Okay.
Laura, this podcast is called Bar of the Conference, and in many ways it's about the stories and the perspectives that many of us will take with us into our next general conference. And all of the issues and narratives and even events that have brought us to where we are as the United Methodist Church. And I really think that the special session of 2019 was a pivotal moment for our church. Now, let's just be clear, though, there's some stuff that happened at 2012 that at some point I've got to talk about. So I'll just name that for those who have heard me say this over and over again. I know 2012 needs to be talked about. I know 2016 needs to be talked about. But it doesn't. I think we need to process some of that, yes. But you were in the room at the special session when the traditional plan passed. And I'm curious how that, affected you personally, what it was like to then go back home with that news that everybody had already learned, but you're obviously coming back to the conference, because you were on conference staff at this point as well. How did you experience that special session?
Yeah. So I was an alternate. So I was in the room, but I was up in like the, I don't know, balcony area, whatever we called it. I don't even remember. But I also want to touch on just a tiny bit of 2016, because that was my first general conference experience being there. Again, I was an alternate. I'd never seen anything like it before. Like people had warned me, that general conference is different than annual conference, but you don't understand until you can watch it online all you want, but you don't understand until you're there.
Right.
And so I left 2016 being like, what just happened? Like how it was, that experience was really wild for me too. I also, for 2016 and 2019, because I was an alternate, I did social media for the Michigan conference. And so I was tweeting the whole time. I was posting Facebook, all that kind of stuff. I used to be a really heavy tweeter during annual conferences. And so our communications director was like, hey, can you, tweet from the visitors area, the alternate area? I'm like, yeah, sure. So the nice thing was it kept me engaged, because honestly, it's hard to stay engaged as an alternate. It really is, because you're so far removed. It just is. So tweeting both of these experiences really helped me stay engaged, understand a little more what was happening, that kind of thing. So that was really helpful. And that's just a good piece to know about my 2019 experience. The other thing to know specifically about Michigan, so we, between 2016 and 2019, we had begun the process of creating a new conference. So we used to be the Detroit Conference and the West Michigan Conference. And in both 2016 and 2019, we still had two different delegations.
Oh.
Yeah, which was wild.
Yeah.
So when we, I think leading up to, I'm trying to remember if it was even leading up to 2016, it might have been, we started meeting together as the two delegations, and it was, I'll just be honest, it was awkward and weird. And like, we didn't really, yes, we're in the same state, but we didn't really know each other that well. We had a pretty, mix of theological perspectives on both delegations. And everything was fine and everything was good. And sometimes we would meet together and sometimes we would meet separately. But we experienced 2019 as one delegation, even though we were actually two delegations. So that was wild.
My goodness.
Yeah. So, and also, West Michigan was small. We had one clergy and one lay. That's it.
Yeah.
We were small. And I think Detroit had I think they had 3 and 3. I can't quite remember, but it was something like that. And in between 2016 and 2019, our first clergy delegate, Lori Haller, was elected bishop.
Right.
So we had her on our delegation in 2016, but then we didn't have her on our delegation in 2019. So it just, all these things, right? All these things were just, it just was a lot. It was a lot. Yeah. So I never made it to the floor of general conference. I was in the balcony the whole time. And it was a real, it was a real helpless feeling of not to say that people on the floor didn't feel helpless, but being even further removed, it was just I'm watching this all happen. There's nothing I can do. There's nothing any of us can do back here. Right. It just, and that gave it, I think, just a little extra heartbreak, being able to watch it and not being able to participate in it. I don't know. It was hard. It was hard when they ordered the pieces of what they were going to address first, right? And the traditional plan, like that. At that point, it was oh, okay, so that's where this is going. And it just never got any better from there. It never got any better from there. Meanwhile, I had to keep tweeting on behalf of the Michigan conference, very just low key, like no
this
emotion.
Is where we are. This is what's happening. Yeah. I feel that. Yeah.
So I had to kind of experience some things and then be like, okay, I need to put this in like a factual statement and not put any flowers behind it, which is really difficult for me. That's not an easy thing for me to do. I'm a pretty emotional person. I'm a 2 on the Enneagram. So I pull in everybody else's feelings and I feel them all, right? So that was really hard. So I had to kind of keep going back and forth between those separate mindsets. Our delegation together, Detroit and West Michigan, we got together every morning. We prayed every morning. The end of the day prayers felt a little different than the morning prayers, right?
Yeah.
Like after you've gone through those days. I don't know. I hadn't thought about my own particular experience of that in a long time. And so when I knew like we wanted to talk about this, I was like, oh gosh, this is just like, I felt the heaviness. Like I felt the heaviness that I haven't felt in quite a while. And that was hard.
Many of our annual conferences responded in specific ways to the passing of the traditional plan, both when we all got home and the conversations that we had, but also then when we gathered for annual conference in 2019. And it was at that annual conference in Michigan that I was not at, just so that we're got the calendar here.
That's right.
But it was that annual conference that you were elected to the delegation as the first laity.
First
member.
ballot.
Yeah,
first ballot.
on the first ballot.
First ballot.
All right, talk to us about all of that. Yeah.
That was wild. So we came back from St. Louis, us Michiganders, and our MFSA groups, our reconciling groups, we were like, all right, let's go. Like we went to work. We very quickly put together what we called the Michigan Statement and took out a full page newspaper ad in all of our big cities in Michigan. And it essentially was apologizing, like, this is not okay. We are sorry. I can't remember everything that it said in that, but it was like a pretty significant paragraph and the newspaper ad, little teeny tiny print of all of the people from Michigan who signed it. Like it was an incredible amount of people. And, at that point, when you can orchestrate something like that as this group, we were like, okay, like this is meaningful. This means that we need to keep this going. Meanwhile, there was sort of a strategy team that supported and helped to out people, one a deacon, one an elder, who were supposed to be commissioned in 2019. And so this other group of people who were, clergy people, because they understand, I don't know how any of that stuff works.
Get it. Yeah.
So all these clergy people got behind these two people to help them, support them, do what we needed to. And at 2019, both of those folks were commissioned. One was commissioned as an elder, one was commissioned as a deacon. That was huge. That was huge for us. It was a very hopeful moment for us in who we are as Michigan. It said a lot. So also, we had strategy meetings about, do we put out a slate of people, of delegates, that MFSA support. Do we not put out a slate? Like, how do we want to do that? And we did. So I can't remember how many people were on that, but there was quite a few of us. And, if you want someone that is in this direction, vote for these people. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, our WCA group also did the same thing. Mm-hmm. But we found there was at least 2 people on their slate that they did not ask if they could be on their WCA slate. A little,
yeah.
Which created, quite frankly, some controversy of like, I was not one of those people, but one of the people who was on there said, nobody asked me if I wanted my name on this, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it just was a little,
yeah.
So then the other thing to know about 2019 was, so we were all in the first year of our conference staff positions as the Michigan Conference. I was in my first year as the Associate Director of Lay Leadership Development. We also had a Director of Clergy Excellence, I think was her title at the time. And because we were a lay clergy, duo kind of thing, we were both women, Bishop Bard asked us to preach at the 2019 annual conference. So we were asked before General Conference 2019. So like when I said yes, which took me a little bit of time to be like, okay, yes, I can do this. Like I didn't say yes right away because that just felt really overwhelming to me. I had preached like maybe 3 times before in my life, and now I'm being asked to preach at annual conference. I was like, I don't know. So
same. It's the same.
Yeah, right. Okay, Derek. Okay.
I've done it. It's fine.
Yeah. So then, General Conference happens and I still have to preach it. And it's just like, what do you say? Like, what do you say? And so that was a difficult process of writing that sermon. I didn't want to get into like the weeds of all of this General Conference stuff, right? I was really specific about the words that I used and the topics that I used. And it was about courage. The whole sermon was about courage, which I found to be very helpful. When I stood up and started my sermon and introduced myself, I said my pronouns are she, her, and that's the first time anybody had ever done that from the stage of annual conference. I got a lot of flack for that later on from people who didn't appreciate me using my pronouns, but I also got a lot of support later on. And so that was really significant. Mm-hmm. So then right after, we did a couple other things after that worship, but then we took our first vote of delegates. I was elected on the first ballot, which was not the plan. It was not the plan. In my conversations with people in the strategy group, it was not the plan to elect me first. And so it was quite a shock. It was quite a shock. Like it was one of those things. I found myself in this situation of like, are you sure? Are you sure? Like, I've never been like a voting delegate to General Conference, and now you elect me first. Like, are you sure? Right. So, and then Kenitha gets elected next, first clergy person. We become co-chairs of the delegation, which was just a wonderful experience. I mean, Kenitha, of course, Bishop Kenitha, sorry. Bishop Kenitha is, of course, an incredible person. And it was really important to us to model the clergy lay partnership, right? Like that is just really important in all that we do. And so that was really great. We wanted new faces for our delegation, and we got them. We had a lot of first timers. Wow. We elected the youngest and most diverse delegation that either conference had ever had, West Michigan or Detroit. Now we're not so young as we were in 2019.
all of us.
We've all gotten a little older.
Yeah.
Like I was in a totally different decade when I was elected.
Same.
But what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? And the fallout from that wasn't easy either. I mean, it was a pretty hardcore strategy that we used to get those folks elected. And it meant that some folks who had been on the delegation for a long, long time were not elected. It meant that some folks with a different perspective that aligned more with the traditional plan were not elected. Not to say that I don't like to use the term that we swept the delegation, because that really wasn't the case. We had some centrists on there who maybe at first leaned a little more towards the traditional plan, but like it wasn't the case where they, were combative in any way, and they certainly wanted to move more inclusive. And so I don't like to say that we swept it, because that just really that's just not the narrative that it was. But it made a significant impact, made a huge impact.
Yeah. I'm wondering then, I mean, what was your sense of and this is where labels are only so helpful, but can also be not helpful. But I'm curious, what was your sense of how the traditionalists in your conference sort of, what did they come home with from the special session and then their experience? And not so much asking to speak for them, but what was your sort of sense of their experience, both coming home from the special session, but then having to sit through not getting any of their people elected to the delegation?
Yeah, and we also took some significant legislation votes that, were very clearly one way. So, I mean, that was another part of not only the delegation elected, but some of those legislation pieces that we took too. I think that I think this is a case for a lot of, again, label, a lot of progressive coalitions. We don't always organize real well. We know what we want to do, but then we have a really hard time making the strategy happen. And that, I feel like that was always the case in Michigan too.
It's not just Michigan. Right. It's not just Michigan.
Right. So we had a history a little bit of some of that strategy, but we just weren't super effective at it. Right. And so in 2019, it was effective. And so I think this is only speaking from my perspective. I think it may have caught them off guard a little bit, and that they weren't necessarily anticipating just the intensity of our strategy.
To what degree do you think it was? I mean, obviously, many of the lay members to annual conference are lay leaders, but some of them are folks in the pews.
Yeah.
And I just wonder sometimes, in Florida, we had a similar criticism. We had a similar story that we went into that annual conference very organized, elected centrist and progressives to the delegation. Again, labels are somewhat helpful, but not always. There were no traditionalists elected on the clergy side, but also on the laity side. And I hear the complaint from my traditionalist friends and colleagues that we ran the table here in Florida. But how much of it was hear what the people who are representing the people in the pews, this is where they are.
Right. Yeah.
And I'll just say, sometimes where they are is not the progressive centrist way of thinking. Sometimes where they are is not even the conference's line of thinking.
Right.
But to what degree was what happened on the ground in these annual conferences,
Right.
really, particularly on the lay side,
Mm-hmm.
the laity, the folks in the pews, their response
Mm-hmm.
to the passing of the traditional plan.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we don't pick those people who are lay members of annual conference, right? Like the local churches do. They pick their people to go to annual conference. So yeah, like that's absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot has happened since then.
Yeah.
The protocol
Mm-hmm.
was put out there in beginning of 2020. Then COVID postponed General Conference once, then twice,
Mm-hmm.
then a third time.
Mm-hmm.
The GMC launches seasons of disaffiliation now, preparing for the next General Conference, which is 2020's General Conference that will take place in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
How are things in Michigan these days, and as a result of all of those events?
Yeah, I think so. An important piece to know about Michigan, especially around the protocol, when the protocol first came about, it needed an annual conference to put it forth to get to general conference. Michigan was approached to be one of those conferences to do that. We had a special session in March of 2020. Let's all think about what's happening in March of 2020.
Yeah.
We had a special session specifically for the protocol. So the delegation, me, I presented the protocol because I was the co-chair at the time. Mm-hmm. I presented the protocol to the conference. They had some debate about it, whatever, blah, blah, blah. They decided to support it, to send it through to general conference.
Mm-hmm.
So like that was a big deal. Like that was a big deal.
Yeah.
I don't know, 5 days later, the country shut down. Look,
gotta have some emotions on that.
Like we didn't know, right, about like the real seriousness of COVID at that time. We didn't know. Like if what we know now, right, obviously that would have looked very different. But at the time it was like March 6th or something. It was somewhere around there. We just didn't know. Like we had hand sanitizer everywhere, right? Nobody was wearing masks yet, but we had hand sanitizer. We made it as short as we possibly could so that we weren't all together for a long time. And like, by the grace of God, as far as we know, nobody got COVID at that event. And we all talk about that now of like, oh my goodness.
Well, I was traveling. I was
sure.
I was on a multi-city. I think I was in either Dallas or in Nashville.
Yeah.
When you all met for your special session, and just going all over the place. And like, what's this COVID thing?
Oh gosh. Yeah. So I mean, that was a significant thing. Even aside from COVID, that the Michigan Conference was one that said, yeah, we can support this enough to get it to general conference, right? And that's what we were clear with them about. This doesn't mean that the Michigan Conference is voting for the protocol. They were just voting for the protocol to get a chance at general conference, right? Mm-hmm. It turns out, I think one other annual conference also did that. It was a central conference that voted to put it forward too. Just in case one said no, they needed to have, I think, a backup. Because you never know. So that was really significant for us in Michigan to be like a part of that piece of it.
So let me ask then, we're 3 years since. Mm-hmm. What's the feeling about the protocol now?
I think the protocol was meant for for the time and place that we were at in late 2019, early 2020. I think too much has changed. I think COVID really, really just changed everything. Like I think anything big like that that came about at that time, I'm not sure is helpful in this particular moment. I don't know. I don't know how like all Michigan United Methodists feel about that. I don't even know how the entire delegation feels about that. We've had a little bit of conversation about it since then, but not a ton. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing.
I want to fast forward us to the North Central Jurisdiction jurisdictional conference. This took place in November.
Mm-hmm.
And your co-chair being the Episcopal nominee,
Mm-hmm.
I got to roll into Michigan Annual Conference in 2021.
2021 was that virtual one, and then
in 2022, yes,
you joined us in person.
Yeah, and so I got to see Michigan affirm.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure, yeah.
Who is now Bishop Bingham Size candidacy to be bishop.
Mm-hmm.
And then it happened at jurisdictional.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like for you? Because she was your co-chair.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What was that like? The lead up and then, yeah.
It was a real privilege to be a co-chair with Kenitha, and some of those conversations that the two of us just had preparing for delegation meetings, just all the things that we did. Every conversation I had with her was just like a gift. It was really wonderful. All along, the Michigan delegation was very supportive of Kenitha in her candidacy. We went through a process in 2019 before, which is wild, before the first postponement even, of like gathering people's names of people who wanted to run for bishop or whatever. And we interviewed, and it was unanimous that we supported Kenitha, and we believed in her and her gifts and her skills and her leadership and her calling. And so we were prepared for North Central Jurisdiction, right? Because generally you take that first ballot, you kind of see where everybody shuffles out, and then they go to their separate rooms so that people can talk to the candidates and blah 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 blah. Well, and then Kenitha gets elected on the first ballot.
These first ballots, man, what's happening?
I know. I tell you, Michigan, we're awesome.
Yeah.
It was just a wonderful moment. I don't even know what to say about it. Like, it wasn't surprising. I mean, we know Kenitha. We know how great she is. Like, it was not surprising that she was elected at all. It was sort of surprising it was right away on the first ballot. Mm-hmm. But what just like a joyful moment that was. It was, she was sitting right near me. Like, I was one of the first people to give her a hug. Like, it was really great. It was really great. We're so proud of her. We missed her.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, like in the early parts of jurisdictional conference, she really kind of backed off just a little bit as co-chair, just kind of knowing she was going to be busy, right? Like, whether she got elected right away or not, like, when you run for bishop, your jurisdictional conference looks very different. And so she had already kind of started backing away a little bit in that leadership role and kind of allowing me to just kind of take over for that week, which was fine. It was totally fine. It worked out well. I mean, we worked well together the whole time. And so it was great until, the very end of that moment. It was really wonderful. Yeah.
Laura, as we're getting ready for this next general conference and a future that is gonna, our church already looks different because of COVID. But you're experiencing disaffiliations in Michigan like we are in Florida. Changes in the way the conference, staffs itself, and so you're experiencing change like we all are. And we're preparing for this next general conference, which isn't everything, right? Like, change has happened, and we haven't had a general conference since definitely 2016, if not 2019, right? So change is not, limited to what happens at general conference, but it's an important place where things could change. What are you hoping happens at general conference?
Yeah, that's a really great question. In this moment, so this is my phrase right now. So something I don't think I answered your earlier question about what things are like in Michigan right now. COVID, disaffiliations, all the things. Michigan is experiencing some budget reductions, right? And so we're going through some staff changes and some staff reductions. And so anytime somebody asks me a question, I'm usually like, in this moment right now, this is my answer. Because I mean, honestly, things change so quickly. Like, it's just, whatever I say today doesn't mean it's going to be the same like 6 months from now. Like, that's just really how I feel about it. So General Conference 2024, I have to say, in this moment right now, I'm really having a hard time wrapping my head around it. I'm having a hard time thinking about the large stacks of legislation we still have from 2020. I'm having a hard time thinking about what is going to come in addition to that.
Right.
And like how to sift through all that, right? Like how I know I'll get there. I know I will get there. I always do. I'm going to be fine. But just like in this moment, I don't even know how to answer what do I hope for. I hope that we can remove harmful language from the discipline. Like if we have to go through another general conference with that in the discipline, oh gosh, that just like makes my heart stop a little bit. I mean, that is certainly something I hope for. I don't know. I don't know if it'll happen. I'd like to think it will because of all the work that we did in 2019, right, to elect these delegations for 2020, now 2024. I'd like to think we can get there and that we can make that happen. But I don't know. 2024 seems very it seems very far away in terms of the fact that we've postponed it so many times, right? Like I just feel like anytime there was okay, it's going to be this date, and we were all like, okay, great, we're going to do these things, and then they postpone it again. Like, okay, great, we're going to do these things, and then when they postpone it again, it was like, no, it's not going to happen. Like, we're still in a COVID world. Like, why are we preparing for this? Chances are it's going to be postponed again. I think what I've most appreciated about being on a delegation through all of this is the depth of conversation we've all been able to have, like, across the country.
Yeah.
Right. Like, we've had more time for our Zoom meetings, for our just kind of like, most of them were not even looking for an answer for a particular thing. It was just like, what's happening in your area? What's happening in your area? What do you think about this? What do you think about this? Right. Like, they just were they were more conversational than I've ever experienced them to be, which I think has been a blessing ish in these postponements. I don't know.
I actually think, Laura, there are probably more people who will resonate with, I don't know, than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you this. What's your hope for the United Methodist Church?
One of the reasons why I put so much into it is for that next generation. I have an 11-year-old who's growing up in the church, very similar to the way I grew up in the church. And I want that for him. I want that Wesleyan perspective. I want that grace. I want that cultivation of question asking when you don't understand. Like, I want that for him. I don't want to talk about who's in and who's out anymore. Like, I don't know why we're still having this conversation. It like everyone is in. Like, I just don't want to talk about that anymore. I want to like further this conversation, right? I want people to see the United Methodist Church and say like, oh yeah, that church, they show everyone what the love of Christ looks and feels like.
Yeah.
Like that's just what I want us to be. That's what I hope that we will be. That's what I hope people will see us as. I want our words to match our actions. Like right now in this moment, that's my hope.
Yeah.
And I think frequently about, so the scripture I preached on at annual conference in 2019 was when Jesus invited Peter onto the water, and Peter got out of the boat and took those steps onto the water and got distracted and fell. And Jesus's words for Peter were, "Have courage." And I think about that more frequently than what I expected to, following that sermon. Diving into that scripture in that moment about having courage and having faith and believing in yourself. Because part of my perspective on that particular scripture was that I believe that Peter had faith in Jesus. I believe that Peter lost faith in himself and lost his courage in that moment.
Agreed. Yeah.
And like that's like that, and that really resonates with me because I mean, my faith in Jesus has always been there. I know it has, even when I was in college and, not always going to church every week and all those things. It's that faith and courage in myself that I've struggled with the most my whole life. And I think that's really I think that speaks a lot into the United Methodist Church too.
Laura, I'm just grateful for this conversation. And again, I'm grateful for your ministry. We need the laity practically in the United Methodist Church. But again, it's that voice of the folks in the pews, the voice of those who were not just coming at these things from a theological perspective or even institutional perspective. We're coming at them as everyday humans, trying to work out how we maintain our faith in Jesus, who has so much faith in us.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
So I thank you for your witness. I thank you for your ministry and your work. And thanks for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. I just so appreciate you. Michigan loves you. They still talk about when you were here the last 2 years. Like, I'm just really grateful for who you are and what you're doing.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Derek.
We hope you enjoyed the episode. Bar of the Conference is produced by the team at Wesley's Revival, a ministry of Studio Wesley. Subscribe to this show on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, or Google platforms so you don't miss a single episode. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.